More hostages and Palestinian prisoners released as Israel's truce with Hamas is extended by a day, minutes before it was due to expire.
The European Commission proposes a series of measures to reinforce passengers' rights, putting a special focus on the reimbursement of delayed or cancelled trips.
Wars, high interest rates and inflation will cause the global economy to slow down next year, according to the OECD.
More Palestinian prisoners have been welcomed back to the occupied West Bank. This latest exchange came before an extended truce deal with Gaza's Hamas militant group was continued for another day, minutes before it was set to expire. 30 individuals were released by the Israeli prison services, 16 minors and 14 women. Earlier, 16 Israeli hostages were handed over to the Red Cross. Palestinian Islamic Jihad claims to have been part of the handover, apparently confirming that not all the 240 hostages seized on the 7th of October are being held by Hamas. Israel has also been informed that 3 hostages, a mother and her 2 young children, including a 10-month-old baby, were killed in an Israeli bombing of Gaza. Israel says it's investigating the claim. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been meeting survivors of the Hamas attack. The group crossed the border on the 7th of October, killing 1,200 people in Israel and taking about 240 others hostage. Netanyahu has pledged to bring back all those abducted. Meanwhile, aid agencies fear that if further truce talks fail, the resumption of Israel's attack on Hamas will lead to an even deeper humanitarian crisis among Palestinians. Save the Children says it will try to continue providing what it described as basic relief aid, bottled water, food and essential medicines, but said it's not enough.
Former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has died at the age of 100. The German-born top diplomat, who became a US citizen in 1943, died at his home in Connecticut. Kissinger served during the Nixon and Ford administrations. A controversial figure, he was both vilified and won the Nobel Peace Prize. After he left office, he was dogged by critics who argued that he should be called to account for his policies on Southeast Asia and support of repressive regimes in Latin America.
Ukraine's foreign minister greeted by NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. This second day of the military alliance's gathering in Brussels saw an inaugural meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. Ahead of the talks, Kyiv said Ukraine needs more weapons for its fight against Russia.
It will not be an exaggeration to say that defending Europe without Ukraine is a futile task. You cannot do it simply for one simple reason, because we currently have the strongest and the most battle-hardened army in Europe.
At the gathering, NATO allies vowed to remain steadfast in their commitment to further step up political and practical support to Ukraine.
Welcome to this first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council at the level of foreign ministers. We remain unwavering in our commitment to Ukraine. We are determined that Ukraine will one day sit at this table as a full member of our alliance.
The meeting also saw the return of former British Prime Minister David Cameron, this time as Foreign Secretary. On the ongoing war, Stoltenberg said Ukraine has inflicted heavy losses on Russia.
Brussels is accusing Poland of not doing enough to put an end to a round-the-clock blockade by truckers and farmers on the border with Ukraine. For days, thousands of lorries have been stranded in queues as truckers claim they are losing out to Ukrainian companies transporting goods inside the European Union.
There is not good faith in finding a solution. This is my evaluation today, and it's a nearly complete lack of involvement of Polish authorities. And I'm saying that because the Polish authorities are the ones who are supposed to enforce the law at that border. And while I support the right of people to protest, the entire EU, not to mention Ukraine, a country currently at war, cannot be taken hostage by blocking our external borders. It's as simple as that.
Polish truckers started the protest earlier this month to call on Brussels to force Ukrainian counterparts to obtain a permit to enter the bloc, except for those carrying humanitarian aid or military supplies. This would be a return to a previous system that was paused after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year. They argue that they are losing out to Ukrainian companies that are offering cheaper rates to transport goods. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drivers have been waiting in their trucks to cross the border as temperatures are now freezing, and many are worried about the situation back home.
Musimy ze sobą się dogadać i jak najszybciej, dlatego że w Ukrainie wojna, giną ludzie co dzień. Biznes też ważny, ale tam giną normalnie ludzie i znikają miasta i wioski.
The European Commission says it is talking to all parties involved to find a solution, but also stressed that it could intervene to ensure rules are respected and laws are followed.
Small backpacks, big purses. What's actually allowed on a plane? Airline rules change regularly, and the lack of common measures often leads to hidden extra costs. For many people, it's difficult to understand what size items are allowed on board for free, which has prompted the European Commission to ask airlines to come up with standard sizes.
Sometimes it's unclear. There is the uncertainty that somebody will stop you and go, you're not allowed that bag, but if every airline had the same rule, that would be easy, but then...
The European Parliament asked some months ago for a standardisation of airlines' carry-on luggage rules. But instead of proposing measures by itself, the Commission says it will let the industry decide if they provide greater transparency or not.
This information should be provided to the traveller from the very beginning, to know exactly when you buy a ticket, what are you buying actually, what kind of luggage you can bring either on board or in the hold. This being said, we reserve our right that if nothing will happen in a reasonable amount of time, that we will step in.
On Wednesday, the European Commission proposed a series of measures to reinforce passengers' rights legislation, and is putting a special focus on the reimbursement of delayed or cancelled trips, as it's discovered gaps when it comes to intermodal journeys.
We've had delays, and sometimes it was very quick to settle it, and sometimes it took a very long time, and especially if you have like 2 flights on a row.
One way the Commission is trying to solve this is via a standard EU-wide reimbursement and compensation form. But it will also try to help passengers be more aware of their rights, especially if they're travelling by different means of transport or if they've booked the trip with an intermediary.
After cancelling his trip to COP28 in Dubai, Pope Francis greeted the Catholic faithful on Wednesday at the Paul VI Audience Hall, but with noticeable breathing difficulties. Euronews correspondent Giorgio Orlandi has more from Rome.
Ancora non sto bene con questa gripe e la voce non è bella. Sarà Monsignor Ciampanelli a leggere le cose.
Dopo il consiglio dei medici che hanno detto a Papa Francesco di non intraprendere il viaggio apostolico previsto nei prossimi giorni a Dubai per partecipare alla conferenza delle Nazioni Unite sul cambiamento climatico, il pontefice ha partecipato all'udienza generale del mercoledì, non ha letto il suo discorso, lo ha fatto fare ad un suo collaboratore ed ha ammesso lui stesso di non essersi ancora ripreso dall'influenza che l'ha colpito nei giorni scorsi e che infatti ha fatto sì che la sua voce sembrasse più flebile del solito. Sappiamo anche che nonostante alcuni dei suoi impegni fossero già stati comunque cancellati nei giorni scorsi, il Vaticano ha confermato che le sue condizioni di salute erano buone ma stazionarie. Sabato la conferma del Vaticano appunto circa questi leggeri sintomi influenzali e il giorno stesso il pontefice si è sottoposto ad un TAC per escludere il rischio di complicazioni polmonari, esame che ha dato esito negativo. E poi domenica realtà il pontefice non ha recitato la preghiera dell'Angelus come d'abitudine affacciato dalla finestra che dà su Piazza San Pietro, lo ha fatto in videocollegamento. Negli ultimi mesi e anni il Papa ha avuto diversi problemi di salute, non è la prima volta che riscontra problemi alle vie respiratorie, lo scorso giugno poi l'operazione all'intestino. Il periodo che va da ora fino a Natale è un periodo denso di impegni per il pontefice, alcuni di questi importanti. Giorgia Orlandi, Euronews, Roma.
The strain of wars, inflation, and high interest rates will cause the global economy to falter next year, despite better than expected GDP growth in 2023. That's according to the OECD, which predicted that economic growth would slow to 2.7% next year, down slightly from the expected figure of 2.9% this year, marking the slowest calendar year growth since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We remain worried about inflation. If inflation were to prove more persistent, further tightening would be necessary, pushing growth down further.
The economies of the 20 countries that use the euro were hit by high interest rates and energy prices after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Growth in the eurozone is predicted to hit 0.9% next year, weak compared to China and the United States, but still an improvement from a predicted 0.6% growth this year. But the OECD warned that the full impact of interest rates in the eurozone is still uncertain, due in part to the region's high level of bank financing.
An island around 600 miles south of Tokyo has grown by 50 meters since the start of November after volcanic activity. According to the Japanese Coast Guard, its eruption reached a height of 200 meters. Footage of Nijima Island in Japan's Ogasawara archipelago was captured by drones. The Coast Guard said it's monitoring the volcano and will issue navigational warnings and other advisories regarding the eruption. For now, it's urging caution for vessels navigating close by.